So today we are joined by historian and author Russell Phillips, who has a new book out just this week, and has written a lot about Soviet arms and armor, and quite a lot about World War II. But Russell Phillips, welcome to the show.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Now, quickly, because the book is out this week, can you tell us a bit about that, and then we'll talk more about your tank-related interests as we go.
Okay, so the new book has absolutely nothing to do with tanks, I'm afraid. It's a it's a role-playing game source book about the special operations executive in the Second World War, because I've one of my early role-playing experiences was with Twilight 2000, and I
We
always
loved
liked.
Twilight 2000 back in the
I
day.
st
Sorry.
still remember making the characters. Yep, so I'm gonna before having to actually haul one around, saying, "I'll take you around a Carl Gustav, 18 kilos." Yes, no worries. Having to then carry one around in real life and say, "Bugger this."
So I always fancied the idea of playing a game set in the Second World War, but of course, like the whole military structure and the ranks and things don't really gel nicely with a RPG group. Of course, Twilight dealt with that, but I just like destroyed most of the military.
And the
Um,
whole of civilization, but it made
yeah,
for
yeah,
made for a good setting that would last about 6 weeks before everyone died. Yeah.
And gave a really good excuse for having the chieftain tank and the multi-fuel engine. Still remember
that's
that
true.
being in
Yeah,
there as well.
but I figured the SOE have the advantage that there wasn't that um, tight rank structure, and they employed women, which always helps. And it just struck me as a way of doing that, a way of being able to play games set in the Second World War without having to worry about like, so and so's the like you have to do whatever your superior officer tells you and all that kind of thing. So yeah, that's my latest one.
Nice. And tell us more about the equipment of the Warsaw Pact series. You've got quite a lot of books there, and I think that'd be quite interesting to a lot of our listeners. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, that I was saying earlier that I'm not much of a wargamer these days, but I used to be. And when I first got interested in Warsaw Pact equipment, I think it was the late 80s, probably like 86, 87, something like that. And it was basically because I was wargaming, and my local club started what we called at the time ultra modern, whereas now it's historical and it's cold, like 40 years ago or something. Um, so they pretty much came out of a desire to have a concise single source that I trusted, because I've got piles of Jane's books and David Isby books and things, and I just wanted it all collated in a nice little package rather than all like spread out over masses of volumes. Yeah, I'm just looking over at them at the moment. So there was the first one was tanks and combat vehicles. And to be honest, that got that got rewritten. I originally wrote a book called Red Steel, which was just Soviet tanks and combat vehicles, and I'd intended for that to just be a one-off standalone. This came out because I read a report in an old British intelligence magazine called Army Technical Intelligence Review. I picked up some copies at Bovington, and it had this long feature about Soviet tank crews training to cross rivers by driving along the bottom of the riverbed with the big snorkel and stuff. And that was really interesting. And on top of that, there was stuff about other bridging equipment and ferries and so on. And so I I rewrote Red Steel to include the rest of Warsaw Pact and renamed it. And then I wrote one about combat engineering equipment, and then I wrote one about artillery. And if I ever get back to that series, then I want to do things like infantry weapons and anti-tank weapons and anti-aircraft weapons and so on.
Nice one.
And
Now, sorry. Go on.
I was just going to say I might do one about helicopters, but that's a long way down the way.
I mean, the Soviet helicopters of the era are very sexy, but sadly not tank related. On the tank question, if you've done stuff about the amphibious wading capability or the snorkeling, now my understanding, but I'm still not entirely 100% sure, it is that was really only intended to be a parallel stream to a bridge in a heavily engineered crossing. It wasn't that you could just turn up to the banks of the Danube and stick your snorkel up and hope that you wouldn't disappear under the waves.
No, it was all my indications are that it would be a very planned thing, Yeah, you couldn't just turn up and drive because there was all sorts of things that had to be just right. There was like the river current had to be less than something like 5 kilometers an hour, I think. And the bottom of the riverbed had to be solid enough so it would take the tanks. And the approaches had to be gentle enough that you could actually drive down and up. And so yeah, there was a lot of restrictions and things that you needed. So
And also you needed to know for 100% fact that the enemy hadn't put one single anti-tank trap down the bottom of the river there.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because that seems like a really easy thing to do.
I guess if your sappers have probably got if they got any scuba gear, they would have been plotting it out already and figuring out the terrain under the water.
And I think they did actually have some specialized vehicles. I can't remember the details now, but there were some specialized vehicles for checking out that kind of thing.
Yeah, with the number of books you've got out over the years, what do you think is probably the one you're most proud of?
Oh, that's
Come on, Russell. Who's your favorite child?
Yeah.
I think it has to be a toss-up between two of them, to be honest. There's Operation Nimrod about the Iranian embassy siege, and A Strange Campaign about the battle for Madagascar. Neither of them feature very many tanks, but there are some on Madagascar.
No, that's the thing is we covered the Tetrarchs that have flown in there, and there was some of the French tanks that were already there. I can't remember. Oh, there was the not the Cardinaloid, the British 6 tons that were there or something like that, being used by the French. Maybe.
No, I don't think they had armored cars.
They had armored cars, but anyway, the Tetrarchs were flown in, and something else was brought in as well.
There were Tetrarchs and Valentines for the British.
That's the Valentines. That's what they
were brought on ships. The Tetrarchs didn't fly in.
The Tetrarchs never flew anywhere, did they?
That was one of the things that interested me about Madagascar when that's a bit of a tangent, so I'll leave that for a second. But it was the one time that they were actually used as light tanks rather than airborne tanks, which is what they were originally designed to do. But that's I first got interested in Madagascar because my wife wanted to do a children's book about a tank. And so she came to me, she said, so she wanted it to be a proper historical tank, not just a generic thing. And she said, so I want a small tank, but I want it to look like a tank, so I want something small, but looks like you expect a tank to look. So I had a bit of a think about this, and I was like, Tetrarch, that's the one you want. So she wrote a kid's book about a Tetrarch. And because of that, I was looking into Tetrarchs, and I think prior to that, I hadn't even realised there'd been a fight on Madagascar, and that got me started on a rabbit hole. And it's a fascinating campaign, to be honest. There's all kinds of little oddities and little weird things went on there.
I mean, just the aspect of the naval control of the Indian Ocean. Once Singapore fell and the Japanese Navy were into the Indian Ocean, Madagascar was going to be if it was not held by the British and the Allies, then the Japanese could have been setting up bases there and causing havoc everywhere. And there wouldn't have been a lot to stop it with most of the Commonwealth shipping. being tempting targets from because they couldn't go through the Mediterranean. So logistically, it was a very important point with the fall of Singapore and the retreat of Empire Navy out of the Indian Ocean.
Absolutely. And it was under the control of Vichy France at the time. And they'd previously handed over bases to the Japanese in the Far East. So there was a fear that if the Japanese went to Vichy France and said, we want to be able to base our ships in Diego Suez, and Vichy would just go, yeah, fine, we don't care. And they, if I remember rightly, the authorities on Madagascar did have instructions that if the Japanese wanted to base any ships there, then they were to allow them to do so.
There's a very particularly Australian citation which gets applied to this. 2 regiments who earned it and a bunch of individual soldiers that they fought all the king's enemies, and Vichy France is one of the king's enemies you needed to have fought, and you know, there's probably 600 or 700 soldiers who earned it, and it'll be on their tombstones that fought all the king's enemies. But yeah, it's to today. It's like, what do you mean France? We didn't fight France in World War II. They were on our side.
we Australians fought them all over the bloody place. And,
yeah, we did. Yeah.
Syria and
if you want colonial
North
fighting,
Africa.
who do you send in? Now, Russell, tell us more about your wife's book about a tank. I think it deserves a more.
I was about to say, it sounds fascinating because it's not on your list of books, so I haven't seen it.
No. So this came about because my son had always liked trains, and so there was a lot of we had all the Thomas the Tank Engine books and things, and my mum always referred to Thomas the Tank Engine as Thomas the Tank. And I said to Jen, like, somebody ought to write a kid's book about Thomas the Tank.
I literally have a Thomas the Tank T-shirt that I should have been wearing today if I'd known this was going to come up. But
I think
please continue.
Is it a Sherman with the Thomas?
Yeah.
I've got the exact same T-shirt.
I think I might have 2 because people keep giving it to me.
So Jen decided to take me up on that challenge. She gender flipped it. So it's actually Tessa the Tank. And it's all like the story is basically that Tessa lives at Fretwell Tank Museum, which is very much based on Bovington. That was the idea, but we didn't want to use real places. So it's Fretwell Tank Museum in the South Riding of Yorkshire, because there's never been a South Riding. So it's all. And she's going to a classic vehicle show, and they put her on this tank transporter called Brian, and they set off, and Tessa and Brian are talking, and Tessa's talking about I went to France once, and Brian's like, oh, well, things like me, you wouldn't have got anywhere. I took tanks all over the place. And he loses concentration, goes through a fence into a field, and breaks down. So then Tessa has to tow him to the classic vehicle show. And when she gets there, she's all apologetic because she's mucky, and the girls running it's like, that's fine, you're a tank, a bit of mud is not out of place. And yeah, that's basically the plot. It's a kid's book. It's aimed for 6-8-year-olds, something like that. So it's not very long. It's not exactly a detailed plot.
No, that's fair enough, but a significant number of our audience might want a tank themed book for their children. So where can they get it?
It's certainly available on Amazon. It is available as an ebook as well as a paper, but I think kids generally prefer paper. It's probably available elsewhere. I honestly don't know. But if you search for Tessa the Tank.
Tessa the Tank. Okay, that's what they need to look for. No, that's useful information. All right. Now, just a question on how, going back to your source book about the Cold War, and I was interested, you were describing Soviet hordes, not hordes, that was my word, not yours. But large Soviet unions, attacking smaller but better equipped NATO units, which is an interesting thing to think about prior to the post Yom Kippur realignment when the Western Allies got more serious about conventional warfare. But it's agnostic to game systems. So how do people go about taking a source book like that and actually applying it to? I mean, what game system would you recommend they use if they picked up something like that?
When I was playing a lot of Cold War games, we used Challenger and Challenger 2. But by the time I was playing, I decided that they were just too complicated for me. When we first started using them, the feeling was that they were realistic. And the thing that
young men with lots of time can come up with a lot of complicated and detailed maps to do everything.
Yeah.
And as you get older and you have less time and less space to be able to spread out your maps and your tokens and everything else, it gets you want something a bit simpler.
But realism is the enemy of fun too often as well. I mean, you want something that doesn't strain reality too much, but you don't care about that 15th rivet at the end of the tank and whether it's been properly hammered in, do you?
Yeah. The thing, and to be honest, the thing that I distinctly remember it even now, the thing that turned me off Challenger finally was that there was the fact that you had to choose what kind of round your tank was going to fire. And bear in mind that these were, according to the book, they were designed for like up to a regiment on the side, like there's a lot of tanks. And the idea that you need to decide whether the loader is going to choose APF, SDS, or heat is a bit ridiculous at that point. But I was watching a friend of mine was playing, and he was going to fire at a little lightly armed thing, with a big gun. I can't remember exactly what they were, but he was going to fire heat because that was the right, like that's what you fire in that situation. And I said to him, "Don't do that. Fire AP because that will definitely kill it." And he's like, "No, but AP could like just go in one side and out the other. It's so lightly armored." I'm like, yes, but in the rules, AP will kill it and heat might not. And as soon as I said that, I thought, what's the point of all this complexity? I can't even go.
Which also ignores that heat is a slow round and AP is a fast round. And also, when you put a hole in a tank, it tends to suck everything through. But yeah, anyway, that's me adding a whole other level of nerdiness that I've picked up along the way. The slowness of the heat round is not something I ever appreciated until literally just the last episode. So it just goes to show we can always still learn.
Oh yeah, that's something I picked up. Oh, do you remember the Microprose computer games?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, I must have played some. Yeah,
I remember seeing the
because
logo.
I had the M1, I think it was M1 Tank Platoon or something, on my Amiga, and I distinctly remember from that one that it made the point that if you fired heat, it was quite a
yeah.
Yeah, whereas if you fired AP, it was very straight. So that but as far as rules are concerned, these days, I'm a big fan of simplicity. And some years ago, I discovered a PZ8. They're called. I've no idea what PZ8 means or whatever, but there's a bunch of them. I think there's a Second World War set and a Cold War set, and I think there might be ones for like sci-fi or something like that. But they're like 2 pages, and they work, and it's easy and it's quick, and yeah, it's now that I'm in my 50s, that's the kind of thing I want.
Sorry, what's the name of that one again for
PZ8.
folks who want to try?
PZ8.
PZ8, and you that'd work well with your source materials.
Yeah.
Nice one.
If I remember rightly, I got them from the Free Wargames Rules website.
Great. Now, if someone wants to start reading your books, where would you recommend they start? And can you tell us about that one?
I think I would probably recommend starting with The Strange Campaign or Nimrod, one of those two.
The Strange Campaign is Madagascar.
Yeah.
And what's Nimrod about?
Operation Nimrod is the Iranian embassy siege in 1980.
Okay.
So they're very different books. So it's really which one's gonna float your boat more.
I like the way in your Operation Nimrod one you call out that the SAS had been acknowledged by the government previously. It just hadn't really made it, and hadn't made it into the press a whole lot before then. And yes, this is really their first outing in the mainstream press, I guess.
Yeah.
And
there's
whereas
a whole
dispelling the myth of that this is the first time they'd ever been mentioned type thing in the secret organization.
Yeah. And there's a whole load of myths around the SAS. Which I guess, it comes with the territory because, they are quite secretive. They don't shout too much about what they do, but yeah, there's so many myths around them, and there's the siege, and I also mentioned in the book that there's this idea that during the siege they were removing bricks from a wall to give them an entry point. And it's complete rubbish. Just
But I mean, not everything ever written about the SAS is rubbish. That's obviously a grossly oversweeping generalization. But I mean, so much of the World War II stuff was, I mean, my reading of it was they were a joke formation made to fool the Germans as a order of battle, and then they got bored and started trying to actually do things, and had to be rescued by the Long Range Desert Task Force numerous times until they figured out how to do things.
that's and like the Second World War SAS, I'm not as genned up on, but it's certainly true that I think their first although I should mention, because I'm currently researching my next book, which will be about the first British airborne operation, and before they became and initially they were known as either the Special Air Service or the Special Service, which meant that for a while they had the initials SS, which seems rather unfortunate, and nobody seems to pick
seems
up
like
on
they
it.
added air just to get away from that, doesn't it?
That's why they started jumping out of planes in the middle of desert sandstorms, so they can get away from it, I guess.
But so that was like 1941. So it was before the whole thing in the desert. I know, like, the first operation in the desert with David Sterling in charge, it was a complete disaster. And yeah, I think there was a certain amount of teething troubles until they worked out how to do things.
Now, one of the books that really jumped out from me of yours was the one about the Welsh miners in taking on the remembrance of the town of Ledici, however you want to pronounce it properly, in Czechoslovakia, and how it was wiped out by the SS, and how this Welsh town said, "We are not going to let their memory pass away. We are going to remember them," and how the SS had murdered basically everybody in the town and tried to wipe their existence from the map. That really stood out for me as a book that has a greater meaning than just history of saying we will not let them just be the Nazis force them out of existence. We will remember them, even though we are on 1,000 miles away, or however far it is, and we have no relationship to them except we are also a small mining town, and we are going to remember.
I do need to correct you that it was the Stoke-on-Trent miners that started it.
There you go.
Because I found out about it because I'm living in Stoke-on-Trent these days. And yes, miners from all over.
Sorry,
people
you're right.
from all over the world.
I knew it was miners, and I always
involved.
associate miners in the UK as Welsh. Sorry about that.
We're more than just miners, Rob.
That's my biases coming through.
There are there's certainly plenty of mines in Wales. And similarly, I always think of miners as South Yorkshire because that's where I'm from, and I was brought up in a mining village. But yeah, I only found out about that because I went to a local museum with my son, and somebody had rediscovered the story because it had been forgotten in Stoke-on-Trent for years, and somebody local had just seen mention of it in some book somewhere and thought, I've never heard of that. That's like, so they started looking into it. And then there was a concerted effort to raise awareness and make people aware of this thing that local miners had done. And so this one basically came up to us and like she gave us a very quick potted overview and then said, would you like to see a film about it? And we're like, yeah, of course. And my first thought was that it was like Orador Siglain, like another one of those. But the thing that struck me about it was that it was so total. Like, they Orador Siglain is like, it's a shell now, but the Ditsa was left as absolutely nothing. They bulldozed the buildings, took the rubble away, dug up the remains of the corpses in the churchyard and took them away, and then landscaped the entire area. And so there was just, when they were done, it was just fields, and there was no suggestion that there'd ever been a village there. And it was that's what struck me, that it was so total. It's horrific to do something like Orador Siglain where you kill everybody in the village. That's a horrendous thing to do. But to then just try and wipe out all, and Hitler said that he wanted the memory of the Ditsa to die, and that's just a whole other level.
Yep. Well, I mean, it's fantastic that they made the effort to defy that determination. We're gonna have to wind up in a second. Before we let you go, Russell, can you tell us what your favorite tank is, and tell us why?
Oh, Lord, I am.
Tested a little tank that could.
I am terrible with favorites. I really am. Like, if you ask me this again tomorrow, I'd probably give you a different answer. But I've always had a soft spot for the Tetrarch. Like, I think that's probably the one. But oh God. But if you're going to allow things that aren't really tanks, then I have to say that the turreted FV432 is. I drove one of those at Armageddon, so that has to be up there. And I like the Scorpion and the Scimitar. All that whole range of CVRT. See, like
CVRT is short wheel-based recon vehicles that are fun to drive, bounce around, and do a bit of just take them around on the road and away you go. But you reckon the FV432, the Warrior series?
Well, the FV432, like I said, it's Armageddon, which is a local. I say local; it's a couple of hours away. They do paintball battles with turreted FV432s, and they also do driving days. And I went along for one of their driving days, so I got to drive one. And I think the British Army originally made like 13 of them. They just, if I remember right, it's the old 432 armored personnel car, and they put a Fox turret on it. And there were only like 13 of them, all in the Berlin Brigade. And Armageddon bought them all to use for the paintball battles. And then and since then they've converted a load more. And when I went for my driving day, I was really quite pleased that the one I got to drive was one of the original Berlin ones. So yeah.
Now I've got to ask, because I'm someone who's been hit by a lot more paintball rounds than I've ever hit anyone else with. What's it like being hit by a paintball round from a tank? That sounds almost terminal.
I think I didn't do the paintballing, I just did the driving.
Okay.
But I believe the paintball battles are basically between turreted 432. So like they're
buttoned up. All right, so they don't have people running around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the commanders don't have their heads sticking out ready to get splattered by a fist-sized paintball, I'm guessing.
Because like I don't know whether it's the different gun or whatever, but like looking at it, it looked about the right size. So you're like, it's 30 or 40 mil caliber. It's going to be a hell of a paintball.
Yeah, and they don't tickle, even when they're non-lethal. But yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, Russell, thank you so much for joining us. And if people want to find out more about you, it is russellphillips.uk.
Yep.
Has everywhere they need to go. And you've been very, very generous sending us videos and pictures recently, which have been included in the show. So we'd like to thank you for that. And
You're welcome.
yeah, Rob, anything else you want to?
No, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Russell, and I'm going to look forward to trying to incorporate some of your role-playing game suggestions and books into upcoming campaigns and see how that goes.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me on.